Cue the intro. Hello, everyone. Happy Monday to you. Here it is a little bit. Hello. My name is Cameron Cowan. Welcome to the Cameron Journal News Hour. Oh my goodness. Thank you so much for bearing with me this week. I was off last week for the Memorial Day holiday, which was a much needed day of rest for me. But that also means we have a backup of 2 weeks worth of news. So I've had to pick carefully what things we're going to cover because a lot has happened since I saw you last. If you are not signed up to the newsletter, please go to cameronjournal.com/newsletter and make sure you are signed up for that. And if you want to support me and the journalism that I do and things like the News Hour and the podcast, please make sure to then sign up for Cameron Journal Plus. It's only $5 a month or like $45 a year. I know that because someone paid for a year recently. And we thank you. All of our Cameron Journal Plus members, thank you so much for supporting the Cameron Journal. We love you. One of the things I am going to be introducing over the summer is little post hangouts on Discord. So make sure to head over to CameronJournal.com. The link to the Discord is right in the social buttons at the top. I'm also going to start putting it in the newsletter more and all that sort of thing, which is why you should sign up for the newsletter. One of the big things that will be changing about the Cameron Journal over the next little bit is I've spent the bulk of my career writing articles, sharing them on social media, making them SEO optimized for Google, all this type of thing. And AI has changed the content game. It's changed a lot of other things, and we're going to get into that. I have 2 stories on that because I just had a great interview with someone from another right-wing kind of shock jock podcast that I was on that wanted to come and talk about AI and everything, which was great. And that conversation will be out in July, but it was really good. But what AI has been on the mind this week, but AI is changing things, and so Google traffic isn't as much as it once was. SEO isn't quite the mover that it used to be. That's a terrible spot on my monitor. And so, so we're going to be making some changes. So rather than writing articles kind of into the void for Google and hoping people stop on by, I am now focused more on a newsletter model. You've seen these, probably subscribed to a couple. The Daily Upside, whose founder Patrick Truesdale I know personally. 1440, different Axios, all those different kind of newsletters. That's kind of the situation we're moving towards. And one of the best things about the Saturday newsletter is it's a weekly wrap-up of stories where I write a bunch of commentary, all this type of thing, that is really, really helpful. If you are one of my business subscribers, and you want to get something specifically for business trends, definitely head over to my LinkedIn, linkedin.com/in/Cameron Cowan, and sign up for my newsletter there because I do specifically business trend marketing advice on LinkedIn. So that's kind of the housekeeping on that. Obviously, following me on social media always helps support the show a lot, and make sure to share it with your friends, especially things like the News Hour, which is now easily done because we have a page dedicated to it, CameronJournal.com/newshour. So, so that's kind of the updates, but things are changing. You're going to see more stuff that is more newsletter focused on sending out to subscribers, to my followers, rather than just hoping Google stops on by sort of thing. So, it's a big change. For 10 years, I've been building a publication and, keeping things ready for social and for search and building social followings and all this type of thing. And, we're finally making a change on that front. So it's a lot. It's a lot to kind of take in and manage and comprehend and adjust, and I've been kind of reforming how I think about the Cameron Journal as a product, as an institution, as a thing. And so, but big changes happening there. So this weekend, if you weren't signed up, you missed the Saturday newsletter. You also missed one of my Sunday dispatches, where I kind of do a column, a Sunday column. I don't do those all the time, but I happen to have one this week. Um, so you will miss all of that. So make sure to head over and sign up for that. So that's the housekeeping. That's what's exciting. We're going to keep this to an hour tonight because I've already done 2 recordings today. One of them was with an institution that talks about independent voters. So that will be really exciting. And another one is for a guy who helps do rehabilitation for veterans and gets them paragliding, which is really cool. And he's actually from the former Soviet Union and grew up in Ukraine, which we'll be talking about the Ukraine bombing over the weekend. So the first thing I do want to do, speaking of terrible bombings, is I want to give a shout out to all of my friends, families, and followers in Boulder, Colorado. There was a man named Mohammed Solomon who's been arrested and charged with a hate crime and possible terrorism for his bombing of students protesting, supporting the Israeli hostages from the war in Gaza. The hostages still held by Hamas. They were protesting on the Pearl Street Mall in Boulder. He threw several Molotov cocktails at them and injured 6 people. Obviously, despite his cries of Free Palestine, that type of violence, especially towards other Jewish people, is completely unacceptable and always will be. Now, longtime listeners know my opinion of that conflict, and they know that I am definitely on the side of justice and freedom for Palestinians and them having their own state. I do not like what Israel has done with moving people out of the West Bank and bombing most of Gaza. There's very little left, all this sort of thing. But going around and injuring people who are protesting in favor of hostages is not the way to deal with that conflict. It's not the way to protest. It's not the way to make political change. And so I want to shout out to everybody because that's where I didn't grow up in Boulder. I grew up near Boulder, in between Denver and Boulder. I spent a lot of time in Boulder. And I have family in the region and everything. And so I wanted to make a special shout out to that and draw your attention to it because it's kind of gotten overshadowed by about a dozen other things happening today. But I wanted to make a special shout out to the situation in Boulder because it's very unusual for that type of thing to take place, but especially in that location and especially like that. I think it also shows the fever pitch that this situation has gotten to and the potential for greater and greater violence, especially in the shadow. In the last 10 years, you've had several synagogue shootings. Lots of people pay for security at their synagogue because of these situations, which is just, I can't imagine paying money for security to go to a place of worship. As a Protestant, that just breaks my brain. But that's the situation we're in, and this has only ratcheted it up worse. So I wanted to make a special mention of that story along the way. But now that we've done the housekeeping, talked about that, given that special shout out, we'll return to the headlines. So let me do this, and let me do this, and let me do this. So the first story we're going to look at, and you're seeing it right here, this is the footage of the destroyed warplanes in Russia. So yesterday, Ukraine deployed thousands of drones from truck shipping containers as far as Siberia and used those drones to basically kamikaze bomb Russian aircraft. And as you can see from this video, the damage was absolutely devastating. These are all fighters here, but they have lost half of their bomber fleet. Those planes are irreplaceable. These fighters are junk at this point. And this has been absolutely devastating to Russia's entire military readiness, capability, operations, not just in Ukraine, but globally. It has been a historic moment, some would say. This is the first incident of a drone attack against, not so hardened, but soft asset targets. And it's also been our first one of the first times we've seen drones take on more traditional military equipment, and also basically take out one leg of Russia's nuclear triad. Um, this is also a historic moment in warfare because it now shows that, drones are the future, and drones can be absolutely devastating to unguarded, unhardened military assets, of which any major military has a lot. It You have to build very big buildings to house airplanes. Airplanes are not small. Building any type of shelter for that is time consuming and it's not cheap. And now every nation is looking at this and looking at it as this could, you could be next. And especially drones are relatively inexpensive to build. There's already been some movement, like by China has a drone carrier whose job is just to put out lots and lots and lots of drones. Um, and I actually had a guy on the show recently who was talking about, the future of warfare as drones, and this video shows what that future starts to look like. And while drones are completely ineffective against fighter jets, when the fighter jets are on the ground, they're totally vulnerable to the drones. And the ease with which this was done, and the fact that it, took 18 months to plan, rumor has, and that it penetrated so deep into Russia has taken the war to a whole new and completely different level. Obviously, when this happens, everyone on Twitter becomes a new geopolitics expert. I don't know what Russia's reply is going to be, but it's probably not going to come by air because how's it going to get there? So it's quite a change in terms of what we've how we think of war, how we think of defense capabilities, how we think of all of these things. And so if you haven't gone and checked out some of these videos, I do recommend that you do. Also, this is probably, it's either going to force Russia to the table for peace talks, or Putin is going to even be less willing to have peace talks. I think it's probably going to be the latter. But also, this is a huge intelligence failure on behalf of the FSB. And they've also got, they're now checking every single container truck going in and out of Russia, which has caused a huge logistics disaster. It is definitely it is a whole new chapter in the war in Ukraine. And that's it's quite significant for that. But it's just absolutely devastating. There's even some other videos running around, from the drones hovering over bombers and then going in and exploding them and going right for the fuel tanks, all this sort of thing. So it's it's a lot, and a whole new chapter in the war in Ukraine has opened, and a whole new chapter in warfare has opened. Especially given that the propensity of other powers to use drones and our comparatively lack of defense from them. So moving right along, because that in the midst of everything, I mean, this has kind of been the big geopolitics in the last 24 hours, but moving right along, we're going to dive into AI. Yeah, AI is fine. So all right, so remember how I mentioned at the top of the show that AI is changing the content game, and I'm kind of moving more to a newsletter sort of model? Well, this sort of conversation gets into kind of what's happening on the front of AI. So one of the I think it was the CEO of Anthropic came out and said openly that AI is right now eliminating entry-level jobs, and that will only get worse in the coming years. And so now everyone is kind of vacillating back and forth between, yes, AI is something, no, can never do that. And this is what I kind of find interesting is that no one, I think, is prepared for the fact that at least in the near term, they're going to try this. It may not work, but a lot of people could lose their jobs or their careers may never start because of this. And so I want to start with this tweet, then we'll get into some reportage from Quartz and Axios. And it says here, It would be political suicide to say, oh, yes, we're going to nuke all jobs with AI. So, of course, politicians and CEOs are downplaying the expected impact. But the cracks are starting to show. The financial elite are starting to salivate at the idea that they can lay off a sizable chunk of their workforce, if not all of them, and then the glut of labor supply will further drive down labor costs. Now, he's not incorrect about that, as one of my foundational things that I have said about capitalism is capitalism seeks what I call a frictionless return, i.e., capitalism likes to make money without having to put in any input costs. The biggest cost in any business is labor. You have the salary, you have the benefits, you have the taxes. Labor is always the biggest cost. And the reality is that by eliminating a certain amount of labor cost, you can make a lot more money and save a lot. I always look at this with the same problem. If the money is not moving through the economy and people cannot spend money, you don't have an economy. So to me, this problem is going to solve itself very quickly. But that is not going to stop the debate on all of this. And David Shapiro is an excellent expert on all of this. But it's the AI is here. It's not just coming anymore. It's here and it's causing effects. And we see that with this story from Quartz. The age of AI layoffs is already here. The reckoning is just beginning. Job cuts are hitting knowledge workers from entry level to management, from tech forward companies to more staid corners of corporate America. And it's true, the jobs being impacted are white collar, knowledge work jobs, which at one time when I was young were quote unquote the jobs of the future. Well, the future has arrived and the jobs are going, we had a nice run, everyone. Thank you and good night. And it's a very sad thing. They start off with a story of this man, Simplice Fosso, opened Slack in March and saw a green checkmark next to his team's name. Checkmark automation. It was small, just an icon in a single word, but it meant his role as head of security operations at a major consulting firm was gone. For months, he'd watched his employer developed and tested a machine learning system that could detect and sort security threats, his team's function, until the digital system was as accurate as the human one. This meant no more 2 a.m. pages, but Fossa was wary. At first, leadership spoke of upskilling analysts to oversee AI output. Soon, the language shifted to efficiency gains. Between December and January, I oscillated between relief and self-doubt, he said in an interview. I told family and close friends this was a wake-up call to pivot while privately wrestling with frustration and a bruised ego. Then came the layoff. What happened to Fossa is happening to knowledge workers across the U.S., from entry-level to management, from tech-forward companies like Accenture to the more staid corners of corporate America. The larger waves of layoffs make the news. Microsoft, Duolingo, and Walmart cutting its technology team. Many more don't make headlines. They live inside calendar invites, Slack channels gone suddenly silent, group chats that turn into gallows humor, and remote happy hours once the axe finally falls. They're in job listings that never get posted because the roles no longer exist. As the losses accumulate, the kind of ambient fear is settling in. White-collar jobs that until very recently offered a comfortable or middle or even upper-class living are quietly disappearing, from copywriters and communication specialists to web designers and software developers. Even some CEOs and venture capitalists fear losing their jobs to AI. Unlike the past waves of automation, these changes are happening not on factory floors, but in the land of glass-walled conference rooms and standing desks, places where your brain, degree, and ability to navigate the organization count most. That's why they feel so different. Sakul Krastev, a behavioral scientist and managing director of the Decision Lab, said AI-related job losses feel much more disturbing. It feels like you're basically defunct, that you're being replaced by something better than you in a way you can't achieve, Krastev said. The speed of the AI wave washing across the corporate landscape makes the shift even more unsettling as security gives way to uncertainty. It's a lot more difficult to compete with something evolving so quickly that you can't predict, he said. You're being pitted against something that isn't another human. People also feel a deep moral aversion to AI, Krastev said, which makes the already significant pain of layoffs and job cuts worse. When you're being replaced with another person, you may feel as if your specific employer no longer needs you. When you're replaced with AI, on the other hand, you may feel a sense of disgust in a much larger sense, one that's more global and transcendent than personal. We're not going to read the whole thing, but it is different than what necessarily happened to blue-collar jobs in the 70s and 80s and 90s, but I know a lot of people are chortling because that at that time it was upskill, go back to school, get different skills, all this type of thing, and, get into the knowledge work of tomorrow. Well, tomorrow's here, and now AI is getting rid of that too. So then that leaves the question, where do you go next? Well, we don't know, unfortunately. I mean, that's the problem. That's the problem with AI. I shouldn't have closed that tab. I got a little ahead of myself. Um, the reality is we shouldn't. I mean, we don't know what the future with AI looks like yet, other than we're probably going to have a lot of layoffs. One of the there was I saved a lot of stuff from the last couple weeks, so I had to kind of get rid of some things. But one of the one of the tweets I saved was someone saying, workers at this level don't like being laid off. They're a lot more likely to riot, cause a problem, cause a revolution, stop this from happening than maybe the blue collar workers were. And there's historic data for that. Most revolutions start among the more educated classes. Even terrorist organizations can be run by very educated middle class people, not poor people. Incidentally enough. Um, and this is we. I think the frightening part is, and it was funny because I reclipped an interview I did with Stefan Fair, who's my AA partner in Germany. Actually, he's in Switzerland. He's German. Lives in Switzerland. And I reclipped it over the weekend. And one of the things that he said, and it was an interview from a year ago, and it was one of the things that he said that I thought was very interesting, is he said at the time, oh yeah, jobs are going to be a thing of the past in 5 years, and at the time I thought that was absurd, but now I'm sitting here today, a year later, reporting on layoffs from AI. And as I was laughing, like, I also just talked about how AI is already changing my own business. It's already changing how I'm functioning because people aren't searching things on Google anymore. They're asking ChatGPT or Perplexity or Gemini or Grok. And Perplexity uses links, but the other four don't. So rather than coming to the Cameron Journal to read something smart that I've read, they just read a AI summary. No traffic. No chance to discover me. No chance to decide they might want to come and watch the news hour or read other stuff of mine or sign up for a newsletter. And so it's a quite different dynamic, and this is now also hitting other people as well. You could define me as a knowledge worker, but it's not hitting a bunch of other people as well. And this is the reality now. This is no longer a theoretical discussion. It's here. It's happening. And if we don't come up with some sort of social plan for this, some way to slot people into other things, or guarantee jobs, or UBI, or something, we're going to have a problem sooner rather than later. And I think we probably don't have a ton of time to think about this. That's, I think, the frightening part. Is we should have already been having this discussion. We're not even having this discussion, and the layoffs are here. And I was actually noticing that the job reports for May were a little bit higher than expected. The job losses were higher than expected. And I believe they also adjusted previous ones up a little bit. We're already. I mean, this is already a very difficult job market. With now it's, oh, your resume has to be ready to be read by AI and parsed by an ATS system, and people are using AI to write resumes for job listings that were written by AI for roles that may or may not exist. That's the job market now, and now people who thought they were relatively safe from all of this are getting let go due to AI. Well, what's the outcome here? Like, what's the plan here, folks? Because right now we don't have one. And that should be a frightening prospect for all of us. Now, obviously, if you are in the trades, because that'll be the first reply, you're safe for now. Um, but also bearing in mind, the robotics people are working day and night to come for you too. So in this turnabout, you may be the last to get fired, but you're not safe either. It just may take a little bit longer. Um, and that certainly was true in the last 30 years between factory work and knowledge work. It's the same it's the same dynamic at play. It's starting to look like no one is safe. Literally, no one is safe, and that's very concerning from a social stability standpoint, which is very important. So, speaking of social stability, over at Axios we have the global economy's trade paralysis. Now, turning our attention to the trade war, there's been a little bit of back and forth about trade lately. So Trump put in new tariffs. A court said they were illegal. They appealed it and said they were fine, so the tariffs were back on. Um, and so, kind of going over the summary here. The world economy has never seen anything like this. The tariff legal fight injects new uncertainty in what was already a historically unpredictable situation. Businesses are in limbo about what it will cost to bring goods into the country. Foreign officials see new leverage in trade talks that could drag out even longer. The billions in tariff revenue expected to help offset the cost of President Trump's tax bill could all but vanish. What they're saying. One day it makes sense to ship, the next day it doesn't, a port official tells Axios. The big picture. Economists expected front-loading on steroids. Businesses would take advantage of a tariff halt and rush to import goods, which could push off risks of shortages and consumer price hikes. Never mind all that now. The Court of International Trade issued a late-night ruling on Wednesday that blocked many of Trump's sweeping tariffs. Another shocker came less than 24 hours later. The U.S. Court of Appeals for the Federal Circuit ruled that import levies could remain as it reviews arguments from both sides. As the courts now play a larger role in the outcome of Trump's tariffs, trade policy uncertainty will only become more entrenched, stifling business investment and consumer spending on durable goods. Bernard Yaros, an economist at Oxford Economics, wrote in a note. Europe's trade delegation was in Washington this week, just as it became clear courts could kill many of the tariffs that brought them into the negotiating table in the first place. It makes no sense to negotiate about that, Bernard Lang, a key European Parliament lawmaker leading the trade delegation, told Axios, referring to the Liberation Day tariffs that ultimately might be illegal. Quote, I guess now we have a better position for negotiation, Lang said just minutes before the appeals court issued its stay, a sign of how quickly dynamics can change. Lang admitted that he has started waking up half hour earlier since Trump was inaugurated, quote, to follow the news coming from the United States. He is on Truth Social. The economic threat of steep tariffs still lingers. The Trump administration could still impose tariffs under the same authorities officials previously used to impose levies on steel, aluminum, and autos. Those powers require more processes to activate, though Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick has said he is moving in, quote, Trump time to carry them out. While the Court of International Trade said Trump did not have unlimited tariff powers, the ruling was more ambiguous about whether he could impose some tariffs. Ilya Somin, one of the lawyers who represented small business in the case, said, economic uncertainty was already at peak levels, and it just got worse. What do you want me to say, everybody? Now, there have been some bright spots, in the trade war, in terms of some new deals signed and some reductions in trade barriers. Trump promised tons and tons of new trade deals. Most of them are stuck in negotiation currently. It hasn't been very long, but the reality is, if you're a small business, you don't have time to wait. You've got to get your goods in so you can get them to market and sell them. So you've got to work with whatever it is. That combined with the loss of de minimis shipping, and drop shippers are out. You might be paying a terrible tax if you order something from Temu. It's all it's all up in the air, and that's the uncertainty. It's not that the trade war is bad or that Trump trying to re-engineer the global economy is necessarily bad, although I don't necessarily agree with it. It's the uncertainty causes people to sit back, wait, not buy that thing, not make that investment. It's not the, tariffs are here, well, I guess we're just going to have to start building in America, whatever have you. No, because we don't know if they're going to stay or they're going to be permanent. They're here, they're gone, they're up, they're down. He's using tariffs as a negotiating tactic, but he's causing so much business uncertainty that there's going to be economic consequences just from his quote-unquote from his quote-unquote negotiating tactics. On top of that fact, as Professor Galloway talks about, countries are learning to trade around the United States, and even as she gets into tourism, which we should talk, we're going to do this, we should talk about this right now. Europe freezes U.S. travel as Lufthansa, British Airways, Air France, KLM, and more slash routes to major cities, including New York, Miami, Los Angeles, and Chicago, to tap soaring demand across Canada, Mexico, Brazil, and the Caribbean. It says here, European airlines are freezing their transatlantic growth and pulling back from major U.S. cities like New York, Miami, Los Angeles, and Chicago as they redirect flights to Canada, Mexico, Brazil, and the Caribbean, where bookings are rising and demand is outpacing the American market. Carriers including Lufthansa, British Airways, Air France, KLM, and Iberia have adjusted their summer schedules to reflect shifting traveler priorities, with more passengers opting for destinations that offer smoother entry, better seasonal deals, and fewer political complications. The changes mark a clear retreat from the U.S. at a time when international sentiment is cooling and alternative routes are proving far more profitable. The decision to reduce flights is being driven by a sharp drop in bookings, raising concerns among European travelers about safety and border restrictions, and growing political discomfort tied to President Donald Trump's second term. Airlines that had once expanded aggressively across the Atlantic are now turning their attention elsewhere. Internal forecasts, passenger surveys, and travel agency reports across Europe point to one conclusion: fewer people are planning trips to the United States this year. So, what have we gained and what have we lost here? Global trade is uncertain. Europe is going elsewhere. I'm sorry, it's hard to look at this and say this is good, great, and we're making America great again. This isn't good. I mean, the amount of tourist money we're going to lose this year is going to be a significant amount. The state of Maine is already struggling because Canadians are staying home. No one in Canada wants to come to the United States. You know, these days, it's practically un-Canadian. And so you have, these new difficulties where we're deintegrating with everyone else. We're not becoming a place people want to go. People may not necessarily know how and if they can trade with us, and how much it's going to cost with all the uncertainty. And all of this is supposed to be one giant quote-unquote negotiating tactic. It's supposed to make, because everyone loves us so much, and they'll all come back, and all this type of thing. What if they don't? What if they don't? What if people decide it's just too much trouble? We don't want to be stopped at the border for having our phones searched and seized to see if we said something against President Trump or Israel. We maybe don't want to do business in the U.S. because the tax is too much, and we certainly don't want our goods going elsewhere to go through the U.S. Ports lose money, shippers lose money, the economy is smaller, tourist destinations lose. I mean, we're just across the board. I mean, the reality is a lot of the U.S. economy is not all of it, but a certain amount is dependent on foreign dollars, foreign inflows, people coming in, bringing money, but choosing to spend time here, all this type of thing, being the center of global trade, being the currency into which trade is denominated. That has made this country fabulously wealthy. And I think the real story out of these two stories is we're starting to lose it. All of it. And that's going to hamstring our growth. It's going to change our economy. People are going to lose jobs. Businesses will close. There will be real life consequences for a negotiating tactic. How much hurt does the country have to go through for a negotiating tactic? I think is the question. Speaking of going through things for a negotiating tactic, let's talk about Joni Ernst, our fabulous senator from Iowa. Let's listen, actually, first.
When you were arguing about illegals that are receiving Medicaid benefits, 1.4 million, 1.4, they are not eligible, so they will be coming off. So people are not, well, we all are going to die. So,
the comment heard around the world. Now, she has done a follow-up, video and was like, no, I was talking about, in general, like in life and because of Jesus and all this type of thing. And nobody's really kind of having it. It's the aide added, said, quote, there's only two certainties in life, death and taxes, and she's working to ease the burden of both by fighting to keep more of Iowans' hard-earned tax dollars in their own pockets and ensuring their benefits are protected from waste, fraud, and abuse, the aide added. And accused the Democrats of trying to whip up fear among voters for political reasons. The argument is happening over Medicaid benefits, and it's happening because there are major Medicaid benefit cuts planned in the new reconciliation bill that recently passed the House and is going to the Senate. It was a rather crass comment thing to say. It was obviously off the cuff. It I don't think she's just kind of like, oh well, people are gonna die. Oh wow. I don't think she thinks that. I think it was an off the hand comment. So let's lower the temperature on all of that. But the reality is, when you have Medicaid cuts and you have illegal immigrants who access their, in fact, I have a story about that. Here it is. When you have illegal immigrants accessing services through their children who are U.S. citizens, which is usually when we talk about illegal immigrants receiving benefits, that's usually how it happens. A lot of the cuts in Medicaid are to prevent that from happening. To that point, this tweet here, where the New York Times casually references that illegal aliens access welfare benefits through anchor babies and birthright citizenship without explicitly saying it because they need to continue the narrative that illegals can't receive welfare. The Times wrote, immigration experts and advocates for immigrant rights say the changes would instead be largely felt by children who are U.S. citizens but whose parents are undocumented, or immigrants who are unauthorized to live in the United States, such as refugees and people granted asylum. That is correct. Like, it's, yes, if you are an adult person who comes here, you can't get benefits. But if you have a child here who's a citizen, they can. And that can, and that can be a certain amount of money. Bearing in mind that immigrants who work do tend to pay taxes, but never us mind about those details. We have this dynamic and the situation, and that's where the Medicaid cuts are coming from. I think a lot of other people are going to end up getting thrown off of Medicaid as well, through these cuts, and the combined cuts of Medicare and Medicaid over the next decade are $880 billion, which is quite a sock in the jaw for the lower classes and poor people who can't afford health care. I heard a comment. Oh, nope, it's just a spam comment. Never mind. It's quite a sock in the jaw for people at the lower end of the economic spectrum. And again, and this is why I don't usually talk about politicians that much, but Jody Ernst made a dumb comment and people are roasting her for it, and it's not fair. But I want to use it as a jumping off point to make a greater point that they said they were going to protect Medicare and Medicaid. This isn't protection. And people are going to die, whether they be illegal immigrant people or American people. Persons, humans are going to suffer from this. And her comment was maybe a little bit unsensitive. And while this dude wants to roast on the New York Times, the way they put this is absolutely correct. It is the children who receive it, and those children are American citizens. And here's the other kind of layer to this when you get into immigration: anchor babies and birthright citizenship. Now you know why they want to get rid of birthright citizenship so bad. Is because people come here, they have children, those children automatically become citizens, and all of a sudden here we are, and we're not separating families and all this type of thing. That's why they want to get rid of it. They want to completely undercut, everyone in the country, in order to deal with a certain aspect of immigration. The question I've always had is, if you're not going to have birthright citizenship, what are you going to have? If being born in this country is not a qualifier, what is? And as someone who's African American, who has ancestors for whom that law was written explicitly, I'm very interested into what your qualifications for that are going to be. Do both your citizen parents need to be citizens? I have friends who are first generation children of immigrants who no longer qualify. What are we going to do about that? When you start talking about something, you have to game out like, okay, this sounds nice, and it might solve your own pet problem, but it's going to affect a lot of other people you don't necessarily think it's going to affect. And that's kind of becomes a theme. One of the stories I decided not to cover when it comes to immigration was the statement of somebody in a town. This woman was being deported, and she said, we didn't vote to deport moms. We voted to deport all the other people, the terrible people, just the gangs and criminals. Well, bad news. Deport them all, and mass deportations means everybody, not just the people that you think are okay. It means everybody, not just, your person that is not going to be immune. That's not how this works. And I think it's incredibly short-sighted to start playing with major levers like this and not understand millions of people you don't suspect, will be affected by getting rid of these things, all so that some brown people don't get any benefits. The state of America today. Um, so speaking of that, I found this one last week, and I wanted I wanted to kind of go over this because it's very interesting. So the State Department has a Substack of some description, and one of the bits in it that I thought was very interesting was the global liberal project is not enabling democracy. Rather, it is trampling democracy and Western heritage along with it in the name of a decadent governing class afraid of its own people. And one, I think it's interesting that's the quote this person pulled, and this person describes themselves as, quote, a heritage American, white. Um, but there was other bits in here I thought were very interesting. And it's actually the bit before and the bit after it. Indeed, a similar strategy of censorship, demonization, and bureaucratic weaponization was utilized against President Trump and his supporters. What this reveals is that the global liberal project is not enabling the flourishing of democracy, rather it is trampling democracy and Western heritage along with it in the name of a decadent governing class afraid of its own people. Our concerns are not partisan but principled. The suppression of speech, facilitation of mass migration, targeting of religious expression, and undermining of electoral choice threatens the very foundation of the transatlantic partnership. A Europe that replaces its spiritual and cultural roots, that treats traditional values as dangerous relics. And it goes on, this one is quite good. By overcoming the anchors of nationhood, culture, and tradition, global liberalism promised the end of history. Today, this promise lies in tatters. What endures instead is an aggressive campaign against Western civilization itself. And I think it's interesting that they're kind of quietly posting this on a State Department Substack, and they're just kind of, they've got some people writing some lovely, basically, college grad school term papers, and on this stuff. When it comes to the global liberal project, I understand at a deep level why Trump and company want to get rid of all of that stuff. It has benefited a certain class of people, not everyone. The gains of it have not been felt everywhere. And this country's always been very uncomfortable with the idea of spreading democracy. This idea starts with Wilson at the end of World War I, quote unquote, making the world safe for democracy. And Wilson had sort of a grand vision of how the U.S. could lead the world towards democracy after the imperial period had come to an end for a lot of Europe. And at the time, we have to remember, the treaty authorizing the United States to join the League of Nations was never ratified by the Senate. We never joined the League of Nations. The U.S. was at that time not necessarily really ready for that leadership. After World War II, we were kind of the last man standing, and so the mantle fell onto us whether we wanted it or not. Different presidents have taken on more of it or less of it as time has gone on, but the natural presumption has been towards it, not away from it. Trump looks at all of this, and this is obviously, not Trump himself, but this is the kind of the intellectual project behind what Trump is doing, has looked at all of this and has said, the liberal classes have started to run away with the farm and leave everyone else behind, and we're no longer a nation, a country with our own culture and traditions. We're becoming part of the amorphous international blob. And let's face it, Americans don't want to be part of an amorphous international blob. We want to be our own thing. And that thread runs very deep in this country. Oh, so very deep. And I find it interesting that they're putting this out here. It's an interesting conversation to have. I could probably do a whole video on it, and I may at some point. But this was just, when I saw this, I was kind of like, oh wow, they're just kind of saying the quiet part out loud. Overcoming anchors of nation, culture, and tradition. There's definitely a lot of blood and soil nationalism that's very popular right now, hence why our heritage American heritage American. Just say white. He's a native of Ohio, white. Just say that. That blood and soil nationalism is so trending right now, and so important is people don't want to feel like they're part of some international blob, and they're just like everybody else. They want to be their own country, their own nation, their own history, and I think also to really have a certain ethnic pride and sense of place that quite frankly has never really existed in this country before, and to some degree our country was kind of built to counter against and sort of thing, and that's where a lot of this is coming from. And so I think we're going to see and hear more of this stuff, more of this rhetoric, more of these ideas, and this is going to become louder, especially as things struggle to move forward. And when you start to think about the movements in the trade war and the movements in tourism and some of the other stuff we've talked about, even today or even in the last several weeks, this rhetoric in that context is very, very important. 2 stories. We're almost done. Oh, Jake Tapper. Oh, hang on. We've got audio here.
I went on a left-leaning podcast that shall remain nameless, and we were talking about my kids because I think they were both people without kids. And they asked me about my son, and I said he was, he's a football player and he wants to be a policeman. And their joke was about my 15-year-old son, oh, how does he feel about minorities? Like the idea that he wants to be a policeman, therefore he's racist, my son. And that was the big laugh, and then I got dragged in the comments and all that stuff. And I thought to myself, this is why you fuckers are losing elections.
100%.
Like my football-playing son, who has no political views, he's 15. He thinks about World War II and gaming and playing linebacker. That's his world. You're deciding he's a racist because he wants to be a cop. And why does he want to be a cop? He wants to be a cop because he wants to help people, and he thinks that's the best way he can help people. And that's how the Democratic Party talks to men, not just white men, but men. And I get the idea that they thought Tim Walz could what's the term he used, code switch or something. He thought that he could translate the Democratic Party values because he hunts and fishes and owns a gun and was in the army and drinks a beer. I mean, at least there was an attempt, but I find it just insane.
Now, that video is important, and there's a lot to unpack there. And I might get to that, but this is the part that this stopped me dead in my tracks. And I thought about it for a long time. Quite a while. Let's just take that in. Jake Tapper is now realizing that his party is the party of hate and division. And the part that really stuck out to me was hate and division. Now I'm going to give everyone a moment to think about this next question. Hate and division against whom? Now, if you look at my screen, which is totally shared right now, you'll notice that the person saying this is MAGA 2024 ex-con deplorable. And he's a semi-professional lifter. And we'll also notice, now, I'm just going to leave that there for a moment. His party is the party of hate and division. Hate and division. Against whom? Now, there's multiple ways to answer this question, but one answer stands out. Let's remember the interaction. He goes on a left-wing podcast, and they ask him about his son, who's a football player and wants to be a cop, and they jokingly ask, how does he feel about minorities? And he immediately pivots to, well, that's why you're losing elections, because you think my son is a racist. Jake Tapper is now just realizing that his party is the party of hate and division. For those of you that haven't picked it out yet, I'm going to walk you to the door on this, and here it comes right now. Hate and division against a very specific group of people in this country. White people. When you have a party, one of the things the Democratic Party does somewhat well, and has been a vanguard of, is a certain amount of racial inclusion. Not a lot. Let's not overstate it. Some racial inclusion at times, from time to time, when it's convenient to do so. The party has also done a very good job of centering women and decentering men. It has elevated brown voices, brown people, at a level you do not necessarily always see in the party opposite. Although sometimes you do, like Herman Cain. Or that other Ben, what's his name, who used to be HSS under term 1, the neurosurgeon guy. You see much less in the party opposite, but you tend to see more on the Democratic side. And obviously, as we know, the Democratic Party has been the party who shouted the loudest about police brutality and this type of thing. The dynamic here is that if you are not centering white people, white voices, white issues, and white values, you are sowing hate and division. It's not that we can all come together as one and address our issues together as a body politic, but that everyone else must live within the one framework. And if you want to change the framework, shift the framework, question the framework, or decide you want a whole new framework, hate and division. As I've said many times, comment has been made, it seems like it's been hate on whitey for a long time. And this is the dynamic at play. That the Democratic Party is just too racist against white people. And has gotten into minority identity politics too much, and that if we would all just shut up about these issues, we could go on as a happy country. Happy country for who? Happy country for who? Certainly not me. Certainly not many other people. But the reality, ultimately, when I saw this, it took me aback, and then I realized, the Browns are getting too uppity. The minorities are getting a little too loud. And we see this especially on LGBTQIA issues. The minorities are getting too uppity, they're getting too loud, they're causing too much of a row, and now it's hate and division. And Tapper think this is why Democrats losing elections, is because we're ascribing. Now, I don't think them joking about his son is necessarily a great idea on its face, but I can certainly see where in certain circles that would be the thing to be kind of like, sort of. I mean, yeah, this idea that all cops are racist is reductive. It is. Not all cops are racist. But I can certainly see where that joke comes and stems from. And you certainly, obviously, with the way the right-wing media ecosystem frames that and how that narrative gets created, you end up with a situation. You kind of see how this all follows along to, well, you're the party complaining about minorities and minority rights. You're the party who's centering brown people and brown voices. You're the people who keeps talking about this stuff. If you guys would just stop talking about the racism and racial issues, then we wouldn't have a problem. Well, of course, because we're not talking about it. Well, it's too divisive. Okay? People are dying. People are getting shot. Terrible things are happening. I'm sorry, I don't know how to be unified about that. But there are some people who are always going to be very unified about that. But I mean, again, it just absolutely stopped me in my tracks, and it really belies the present dynamic on these issues. And it's kind of couched in the here's why Democrats are losing white men. And I think it comes from a very real and sincere belief that, by some people in the party, white men are the problem and all this sort of thing. And a lot of that does go too far. Not saying it doesn't, it does go too far. But this whole idea that, we've had as much of the uppity Negroes and the uppity Hispanics and the uppity Browns and the uppity gay people, all that stuff. You know, everyone. Today's first Monday of June, June 2nd, and I've seen more than one post of people being like, "Oh, thank God, there's no Pride stuff," or "Here's how to survive, you know, the Rainbow Month with the gays again." Everyone, I think the general one of the trends that I'm seeing in politics, and this video is emblematic of it, is that people have just kind of had it with all of it. Um, and they're tired, they're wore out, they don't want to talk about it, they don't want to deal with it. It honestly, it's 1877. We gave up on Reconstruction not because the job was done, but because we got tired of paying for it, and we got tired of dealing with it, and we let the South be racist for another 100 years. You know, and this is I think also we've reached that same 1877 Reconstruction inflection point where nobody wants to deal with this stuff anymore. No one wants to talk about it anymore, and Jake Tapper feels like his son's been discriminated against, and so I'm not surprised. I'm not. I'm not surprised. Um, it's you know, certainly it's certainly relevant to today. I understand where people are coming from, but when hate and division is defined not by who's dying, not by who is being oppressed, not by who doesn't have access to justice, economic opportunity, or whatever have you, and they complain about it, and they complain about it for long enough that you get tired of hearing about it, and you complain that there's too much hate and division, that says more about one group than it does about the other. And you don't even want to go read the comments, because the first one is not great. We're going to wrap up on this story. It has to do with Elon Musk, who's had a falling out. Well, First Lady Melania has fallen out with President Trump. So, and so he is officially exited the White House. Elon Musk took a swipe at President Trump's signature domestic policy legislation, saying it would add to the national deficit. He complained to administration officials about a lucrative deal that went to a rival company to build an artificial intelligence data center in the Middle East, and he has yet to make good on a $100 million pledge to Trump's political operation. Mr. Musk, who once called himself the president's first buddy, is now operating with some distance from Mr. Trump as he says he is ending his government work to spend more time on his companies. Mr. Musk remains on good terms with Mr. Trump, according to White House officials, but he's also made it clear that he is disillusioned with Washington and is frustrated with obstacles he encountered as he upended the federal bureaucracy, raising questions about the strength of the alliance between the president and the world's richest man. Mr. Musk was the biggest known political spender in the 2024 election, and he told Mr. Trump's advisors this year that he would give $100 million to groups controlled by the president's team before the 2026 midterms. As of this week, the money hasn't come in yet, according to multiple people familiar with the matter, who spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe the behind-the-scenes dynamic. Mr. Musk did not respond to a request for comment. In a post on X, his social media site, on Wednesday night, he officially confirmed for the first time that his stint as a government employee was coming to an end, and thanked Mr. Trump, quote, for the opportunity to reduce wasteful spending, unquote. Quote, the @Doge mission will only strengthen over time as it becomes a way of life throughout the government, he added, referring to his Department of Government Efficiency team. The billionaire's imprint is still firmly felt in official Washington through that effort, an initiative to drastically cut spending that has deployed staff across the government. But Mr. Musk has said in recent days that he spent too much time focused on politics and has lamented the reputational damage he and his companies have suffered because of his work in the Trump administration. Quote, I think I probably did spend a bit too much time on politics, unquote, Mr. Musk said in an interview this week with Ars Technica, a tech news outlet. He added, quote, it was just a relative time allocation was probably a little too high on the government side, and I've reduced that significantly in recent weeks, unquote. He also took a swipe at Mr. Trump's allies in Congress, telling CBS News that he was, quote, disappointed, unquote, by the domestic policy bill that the president championed and the House passed this week. Quote, I was disappointed to see the massive spending bill, frankly, which increases the budget deficit, not just decreases it, and undermines the work that the Doge team is doing, unquote, he said. When asked by reporters about Mr. Musk's criticisms on Wednesday, Mr. Trump declined to respond directly. He defended the bill while acknowledging that he did not love every aspect of it, and he lauded Republicans' efforts to move it forward. He did not once utter Mr. Musk's name. However, Stephen Miller, the White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy, shot back at Mr. Musk on social media without naming him. Mr. Miller asserted that the bill would reduce the deficit, despite multiple independent analyses saying otherwise, and noted that the cuts made by Mr. Musk's team were unrelated to the spending bill. Ahead of Mr. Trump's trip to the Middle East this month, Mr. Musk objected to a deal in the works between a rival AI company and the United Arab Emirates to build a massive data center in Abu Dhabi, according to a White House official. Mr. Musk complained to David Sachs, the president's AI advisor, and other White House officials about the Abu Dhabi project involving OpenAI, an organization he founded with Sam Altman, with whom he has since had a falling out, according to the official. He also expressed concerns about fairness more broadly for other AI companies and sought to have his own company, XAI, be included in the deal, though ultimately it was not. The Wall Street Journal first reported on Mr. Musk's pushback. So it appears that Mr. Musk has had a major falling out with President Trump, and yeah, that I mean, are any of us surprised? We kind of saw this coming. It was all rocky and crazy from the beginning anyway, and if Musk thought he was going to become Trump's friend and get to do whatever he wanted and all this type of thing, it was not going to happen. Here's the dumb part. He probably could have kept going around doing whatever, but the reality is Musk is losing money being in government. I mean, people are, the cars are getting keyed. Tesla sales in Europe have all but cratered. He's losing billions of dollars, and the view of him, his companies, his being a vanguard of the green movement is, reputation is something you can't buy with money, and you can't buy it back once you lose it. And the reality is his whole brand has taken a major pounding, and not in a fun way, during his brief stint in government. If you think about dollars per day, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. And so, yeah, I'm not surprised that he's getting out of Washington because, quite honestly, he can't afford to stay there anymore. So, anyway, that's me. That's the Cameron Journal News Hour. My name is Cameron Cowan. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure to follow me on social media at Cameron Cowan on Instagram and on X and /Twitter, at Cameron Journal on TikTok. I very much look forward to seeing you on the next edition of my newsletter. So make sure to go sign up for that. CameronJoel.com/newsletter. I'll see you on social media, and I will see you next week. The interview this week is really fascinating for my marketing and business people. It's with Corey Quinn about why your marketing should be for anyone, but not everyone. So if you're looking for some new marketing ideas for your business or your job or your role, make sure to check that out. And also last week's interview was with a poet from the South who was really great, and not enough people watched that. So go watch last week's interview too with Clint Sabam. He's fascinating. So go check out those interviews. Like I said, my name is Cameron Cowan. Thank you so much. I'll see you next Monday. Bye-bye now.